Welcome back to Fear Rest. In today's episode, I'm sharing 9 true disturbing stories from the Cumberland Mountain backroads. These are tales of people who ventured into those isolated ridges and hollows after dark and encountered something that defies explanation. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The stretch of Route 421 that cuts through Cumberland Gap has maybe 3 houses in a 20-mile span. My Uncle Dennis owned one of them, a narrow 2-story place that sat so close to the road you could hear every semi that passed through at night. He'd lived there alone since his wife passed in 2003, and when he died that October, I inherited it along with about 40 years of accumulated junk I needed to sort through. I drove up from Lexington on a Thursday. It was late September, and the leaves were just starting to turn. I'd taken the week off work, figuring I could get most of it done if I stayed at the house instead of driving back and forth. The place still had power and running water. Uncle Dennis had been meticulous about bills, even when his mind started going near the end. The house smelled like old coffee and the specific kind of mustiness that comes from someone living alone for too long. I spent that first day just opening windows, going through the kitchen, bagging up expired food. Found a calendar from 1987 still hanging in the pantry. Dennis had circled random dates with no explanation. The 3rd of every month had a red X through it. I brought an air mattress and set it up in the living room because the bedrooms upstairs felt too personal somehow. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand. A book about the Civil War opened face down on the bed. I closed the door and didn't go back in. That night I heated up a can of soup on the stove and ate it watching some game show on the old tube TV Dennis still had. The thing only got 3 channels clearly. Around 9:30 I heard a knock on the front door, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I wasn't expecting anyone, didn't even know who the neighbors were or if Dennis had kept in touch with anybody. I turned on the porch light and opened the door. Nobody there. The road was empty in both directions. I could see pretty far. There was a street light about 100 yards south that lit up that whole section. I told myself maybe it was one of those big moths that slam into doors or the house settling. Old places do that. I went back to my soup. It had gone cold while I was checking the door. Around midnight, I turned off the TV and tried to sleep, but I'm one of those people who needs it completely dark. The streetlight outside threw this amber glow across the whole living room. I got up and closed the curtains, and that's when I noticed the figure standing at the edge of the light. It was too far away to make out features, but I could see it was tall, taller than seemed right, and it was facing the house, just standing there in the middle of the empty road. My mouth went dry. I stepped back from the window, told myself it was a neighbor out for a walk, even though that made no sense at this hour on a road with no sidewalks and nothing to walk to. I waited maybe 2 minutes, then looked again. It had moved closer, not walking distance closer. It was now standing at the edge of the driveway, maybe 30 feet from the house, still just standing there. I couldn't see its face in the shadow, but I knew it was looking at the window I was looking out of. I grabbed my phone to call 911. And when I looked up again, it was gone. I turned on every light in the house, checked the front door, still locked. Checked the back door, the windows, everything. I even went upstairs, which I'd been avoiding, and looked out the bedroom windows. Nothing. The road was empty. I didn't sleep. I sat on the air mattress with my back against the couch, lights on, waiting for another knock that didn't come. When dawn finally came, I felt stupid, exhausted and stupid. I made coffee and started going through boxes in the garage, trying to convince myself I'd been seeing things, stress, and an unfamiliar place. I found a shoebox full of photographs. Most were of people I didn't recognize, Dennis's wife's family, I assumed. But near the bottom there was a Polaroid that made me stop. It was a picture of this house, taken from across the road. The angle was strange, too high up, like someone had been standing on a ladder. And in the window of the living room you could see a figure, just a dark silhouette, but it was clearly looking out. The photo was dated on the back in Dennis's handwriting. March 3rd, 1994, came back. I remembered the calendar. The red X on every 3rd of the month. I looked at more photos, found another one, same angle, dated September 3rd, 1998, same figure in the window. Another from June 3rd, 2006, always the same angle, always the figure in the window, always the 3rd. My hands were shaking. Today was September 28th, not the 3rd. I was fine. I spent the rest of that day packing my car with anything that seemed valuable or important. I worked fast. Every time I passed a window, I had to fight the urge to look out. Around 4 in the afternoon, I found something else. In a drawer in Dennis's bedroom, there was a journal, spiral-bound, maybe half the pages filled with his tight handwriting. The entries were sporadic, jumping between years, but they all said basically the same thing. It came back, same as always, closer than last time. Knocked again, I didn't answer. It stood there until sunrise. I saw its face this time. I can't describe it. I won't. The last entry was from March 3rd, 6 months before Dennis died. All it said was, "It knows I'm going soon. It's patient." I loaded the last box into my car just before sunset. I wasn't planning to stay another night, but I wanted to get the utilities turned off first. I called the electric company from inside the house, was put on hold, listening to that tinny hold music or watching the light fade outside the windows. The representative finally picked up just as I heard it. 3 slow knocks on the front door. I hung up without saying anything. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my keys and went for the back door, trying to be quiet, trying to convince myself that running was insane, that I should just look and confirm it was nothing. I looked. Through the small window in the front door, I could see it standing on the porch. It was pressed right up against the door, and its face was level with the window, even though that put its head at least 7 feet high. The skin was waxy and colorless in the porch light. Its eyes were open too wide and they didn't blink. When it saw me looking, its mouth opened. Just dropped open like a puppet's jaw, opening far wider than a mouth should, and something that might have been a voice came out, but it sounded like it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere farther away. It said my name. I ran out the back door to my car, fumbling with the keys. My hands wouldn't work right. Behind me, I heard the front door rattling in its frame, the knob turning even though I'd locked it. I got the car started and reversed out of the driveway so fast I almost hit the mailbox. In my rearview mirror, I saw it come around the side of the house, moving in that too smooth way, not quite walking, not quite gliding. It stopped at the edge of the property, right where the driveway met the road, and it watched me drive away. I didn't look back after that. I drove straight to Lexington, called a lawyer the next morning and told him to sell the property as is. I didn't care what it went for. I never went back. The house sold in December to a couple from Nashville. I hope they're okay. I hope it was only waiting for Dennis's family. But sometimes I wonder what date they moved in on. Story 2. My best friend Shayna and I decided to camp at Hensley Settlement that May for her birthday. It's this old restored homestead deep in Cumberland Gap National Park. You have to hike about 4 miles to reach it, and the Park Service lets you camp there if you reserve ahead. We'd been planning it for months. Shayna had just finished her master's degree, and I'd wrapped up a project at work that had been killing me since January. We needed the break. The hike-in was beautiful. It was a Tuesday, middle of the week, and we didn't see another person on the trail. The settlement sits on Brush Mountain at about 3,600 feet, and when you come over that last ridge and see the old cabins spread out across the clearing, it feels like you've stepped back 100 years. The Park Service maintains the buildings, but they're empty now. No power, no running water. Just log structures slowly weathering, fences sagging, the forest creeping in at the edges. We set up our tent near one of the old barns, away from the main cluster of buildings. The ranger we talked to when we got our permit had mentioned that sometimes other campers like to stay in the actual cabins, and Shayna wanted privacy. She'd brought a bottle of wine and these fancy crackers with cheese. We sat outside the tent as the sun went down, talking about nothing important, watching bats come out. I think it was around 10 when we heard the singing. It was faint at first. I actually thought it might be wind through one of the cabin doors, but then it got clearer. A woman's voice, high and wavering, singing something that wasn't quite a melody. No words I could make out, just this tuneless rising and falling that set my teeth on edge. "Is someone else here?" Shayna whispered. I didn't think so. We walked the entire settlement before setting up camp. There'd be no cars at the trailhead except ours. But the singing was definitely coming from one of the buildings. We sat there listening for maybe 5 minutes. It would fade away and I'd think it had stopped, and then it would start up again. Same melody that wasn't a melody, same high strained quality. "Should we check?" Shayna asked. I didn't want to, but sitting there listening was somehow worse. We got our flashlights and walked toward the main cluster of cabins. The singing was coming from the largest one, the Gibbons house, I think it was called. The door was standing partway open. Shayna reached for it and I grabbed her wrist. Don't. Someone might need help. Then they can come out here. We stood there in this stupid standoff for a few seconds, and then the singing stopped. Just cut off mid-note. The silence was worse. We went back to the tent. Neither of us slept much that night. Around 2 in the morning I had to pee, and I made Shayna come stand outside the tent with a flashlight while I went behind a tree. I felt ridiculous, like a child afraid of the dark. But I kept thinking about that singing and the way it had just stopped. When I came back, Shayna was staring at the Gibbons house. "The door's closed now," she said. I looked. She was right. The door we'd left standing open was now shut tight. "Wind," I said. I didn't believe it. We finally fell asleep sometime before dawn. I woke up to Shayna shaking my shoulder. The tent was hot. The sun was already high up. I checked my watch. 9:30. We slept later than we'd planned. "Listen," Shayna said. I listened. Heard birds, wind, the normal sounds of morning. I don't hear anything. Exactly, no birds near the tent. They were everywhere yesterday. She was right. The birds were singing, but they were distant, like they'd moved away from our immediate area. We ate a quick breakfast, granola bars, instant coffee made with water we'd filtered from a stream. I wanted to pack up and leave, but Shayna had paid for 2 nights, and she insisted we stay at least until that afternoon. We could hike around, see some of the other parts of the settlement we'd missed. We walked up to the old cemetery around noon. It was on a small rise above the cabins, surrounded by a weathered fence. Most of the markers were worn smooth, dates from the 1800s barely visible. One grave was newer, or at least the marker was. Someone had placed flowers there recently. They were dried out, but not ancient. The name on the stone was Martha Gibbons, died 1951. "That's weird," Shayna said. "I thought the settlement was abandoned in the 1950s. "Maybe she was the last one to leave," I offered. We didn't talk about it matching the name of the cabin where we'd heard the singing. On the way back down, Shayna stopped suddenly. She was looking at the Gibbons house again. The door's open. I looked. She was right. The door was standing open the exact same way it had been the night before. "We are leaving," I said. "It's just wind." "I don't care. We are leaving." We packed up fast. The whole time I felt like someone was watching us from the cabin, but every time I looked, I couldn't see anyone in the dark doorway. We had everything in our packs in under 20 minutes. As we were leaving, walking past the Gibbons house toward the trail, I made the mistake of looking inside. There was a woman standing in the front room. She was facing away from us, looking toward the back of the cabin, and she was wearing a long dress that might have been blue once but had faded to gray-brown. Her hair was long and hung down her back in a single braid. I stopped walking. Shayna stopped next to me. "Hello," I called out. The woman didn't turn around, didn't move at all. "Are you okay?" Shayna tried. Still nothing. And then slowly the woman's head began to turn. Not her body, just her head, rotating at the neck at an angle that was wrong, too far, past the point where her neck should stop. When her face came into view, I saw that her mouth was open, stretched wide, and that's when the singing started again. We ran. I don't remember much of the hike down, just running, slipping on loose rocks, my pack bouncing so hard it bruised my back. Shayna was ahead of me, and I kept my eyes on her because I was terrified that if I looked back, I'd see that woman following us. We made it to the car in under 2 hours, a hike that had taken us 3.5 on the way up. We didn't stop until we were back on Highway 25E, miles away, and even then we didn't talk about it for another hour. Shayna tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a park ranger in period costume, doing some kind of interpretation. Maybe we'd misunderstood what we saw, but neither of us believed it. 2 days later, I got a notification from Instagram. Shayna had posted a photo from the trip. It was one I'd taken of her standing by the barn, the settlement buildings visible in the background. In the window of the Gibbons house, there was a figure, just a pale shape, but you could make out the long dress, the braid of hair. The caption said, "Thought this was a beautiful shot until I zoomed in." I commented, "Delete this." She did within minutes. "We haven't talked about going back. I don't think we ever will." Story 3. I work for a surveying company out of Middlesbrough, and that November we got contracted to map a large property near Yellow Creek. The owner wanted to subdivide it for some kind of development, vacation cabins, I think. The property was about 200 acres of dense forest running up the side of a ridgeline, and nobody had done a proper survey since the 1970s. My supervisor, a guy named Viktor Petrov who'd been doing this for 30 years, decided we'd start on the north end and work our way down over the course of a week. It was just the two of us on this job. Usually we'd have a 3-person crew, but the company was understaffed and the client wanted it done before winter set in. The first day was normal. We established our base points, started running transects. The forest was mostly oak and hickory, not much undergrowth, so the going was easy. Victor was the kind of guy who didn't talk much while working, which I appreciated. We'd just call out numbers and coordinates, mark waypoints, move on. We were packing up around 4 when Victor stopped and tilted his head like he was listening. "You hear that?" I listened, heard wind, some crows in the distance. "Hear what?" "Chopping, like someone cutting wood." I listened harder. There was a rhythm to the wind, I guess, a steady sort of pulse, but I wouldn't have called it chopping. "I don't think so," I said. Victor frowned but didn't push it. We hiked back to the truck and drove to the motel we'd booked in town. The second day we worked a section deeper into the property, maybe a mile from where we'd parked. The terrain got steeper and rockier. Around mid-morning I found a rock cairn, just a stack of stones, waist-high, sitting in a small clearing. It wasn't marked on any of the old maps. "Probably hunters," Victor said when I showed him. "They mark spots they want to come back to." But something about it bothered me. The stones were stacked too carefully, too deliberately. And there was a pattern to them, flat stones alternating with round ones, like someone had put real thought into the arrangement. We marked it on our GPS and moved on. That afternoon Victor heard the chopping again. This time I heard it too. 3 distinct sounds, chop, 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 and then silence. Then 3 more. It was coming from upslope, somewhere above us in the denser timber. "Could be the property owner," I suggested, "doing some clearing." "Maybe." But Victor looked uneasy. He kept glancing uphill while we worked. We didn't see anyone. The chopping would start and stop at random intervals all afternoon. Always 3 strikes, always from the same general direction. On the 3rd day we found the first post. It was a stripped sapling, maybe 8 feet tall, driven into the ground at the edge of another small clearing. There were marks carved into it, geometric shapes I didn't recognize. The wood was weathered gray, but the carvings looked relatively fresh. "That's not from the 70s, Victor said quietly. We found 2 more posts that day, each in a different clearing, each carved with similar symbols. They formed a rough triangle and we were working in the middle of it. "I don't like this," Victor said during lunch. We were sitting on a downed log, eating sandwiches from a cooler. "These markers, they're warnings." "Warnings about what?" "Property boundaries, maybe, or hunting territory." "Shouldn't there be signs if someone's hunting here?" Victor didn't answer. He was looking at something over my shoulder. I turned around. There was a man standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 yards away. At least I thought it was a man. He was too far away and too shadowed by the trees for me to make out details. But he was tall, very tall, and he was standing completely still, watching us. "Hello," I called out. "We're surveyors working for the property owner. Are you?" The figure stepped backward into the trees and disappeared. "Did you see how he moved?" Victor's voice was tight. "What do you mean?" "He didn't turn around, he just stepped backward, while still facing us." I had seen it, but I'd been trying not to think about it. People don't move like that. It's not natural. We packed up early that day. Victor wanted to talk to the property owner, get clarification on whether anyone else had permission to be on the land. We drove back to town, and Victor made the call from the motel parking lot. I watched his face while he talked. When he hung up, he looked pale. What did he say? "He says nobody has permission. He hasn't been up there himself in over a year." And when I described the posts with the carvings, he got quiet. Then he said his grandfather used to talk about keep-away markers the old Cherokee would put up. Places you weren't supposed to go. This land was Cherokee territory. A long time ago, before it was surveyed the first time. We sat in the truck for a while. Victor was drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, thinking. "We're almost done," he finally said. "2 more days. We push through, finish the job, and we don't come back." Agreed. I agreed. The 4th day it rained, hard, steady rain that made surveying impossible. We stayed in the motel. I tried to watch TV, but I kept thinking about the figure in the trees and the way it had moved. Kept thinking about those posts and what they might have been marking. The fifth day dawned clear and cold. We drove back to the property and hiked into the section we needed to finish. It was the southern part of the land, the steepest section, where the ridge dropped into a hollow. We found the structure around noon. It was built into the hillside, half underground, a framework of logs and woven branches forming a dome maybe 15 feet across. The entrance was a low opening, dark inside, and there were bones hanging from the framework. Small bones, arranged in patterns, birds maybe, or rabbits. "We are leaving," Victor said immediately. "We have to finish." "No, we are leaving now." He turned and started walking back the way we'd come, not running but moving fast, not looking back. I followed because I didn't want to be alone near that structure. We were maybe 10 minutes into the hike when we heard it behind us. Footsteps, but wrong, too many feet, or feet hitting the ground in the wrong rhythm. And something else, a wet clicking sound that I couldn't identify. Victor stopped and pulled out his pocket knife. It was a small knife, the kind you use to cut rope or open packages. Useless as a weapon, but he held it anyway. "Don't look back," he said. "Just walk, steady pace." We walked. The footsteps kept pace behind us, never getting closer, never falling behind. I could hear branches breaking, leaves rustling. Whatever it was big and it wasn't trying to be quiet. The clicking got louder. We made it to the truck. I've never been so grateful to see a vehicle in my life. We threw our gear in the bed, climbed in, and Victor started the engine with shaking hands. As we pulled away, I looked in the side mirror. There was something standing at the edge of the trees where the trail started. It was tall and thin, and its limbs were too long, and even from that distance, I could see that its jaw was hanging open, swinging loose, and that's where the clicking sound had been coming from, teeth knocking together in that open mouth. Victor drove us straight to the client's house. He told him the job was done, lied, said we'd finished the survey. He gave him the GPS data we had, and said we decompile the final maps and send them over. The client seemed confused, but accepted it. We drove back to Middlesbrough and Victor filed the report. Then he quit, just turned in his resignation that day, said he was done with fieldwork. I stayed with the company for another 2 months before I left too. Every job we took, every property in the mountains, I'd think about those posts and that structure and the thing that followed us back to the truck. The property never got developed. I checked a year later and it was still for sale. The same listing, same photos, same description. Nobody wants it. I understand why. Story 4. My dad died in August and left me his hunting cabin off Stinking Creek Road. I'd been there maybe twice as a kid. It was a 2-room shack with a wood stove and a creek running behind it, surrounded by about 15 acres of laurel and pine. He'd bought it in the 90s when he was really into bow hunting, but by the time I was old enough to remember, he'd already stopped going. I asked him about it once, why he didn't use the cabin anymore, and he just said the hunting had gotten bad up there. I didn't want the property. I had no use for a hunting cabin and no interest in maintaining it. But it was mine, and my sister Alina convinced me I should at least go see it before I sold. Make sure there wasn't anything valuable inside, drain the water lines before winter, that kind of thing. I drove up on a Saturday in October. Took me 2 hours from Knoxville, the last half hour on increasingly bad roads. Stinking Creek Road was barely paved, then it turned to gravel, then to dirt that was more ruts than road. The cabin was at the end, set back in the trees, and when I parked I had that immediate sinking feeling of isolation. No cell service, no houses visible through the trees, just forest and the sound of water moving over rocks. The cabin was in better shape than I'd expected. My dad must have paid someone to check on it periodically. The door was locked. I had to use the key from his estate paperwork. Inside smelled like old smoke and damp wood, but there was no rot, no animal damage. 2 rooms like I remembered, a main room with the stove and a small back room with a cot and some shelves. Coleman lanterns hung from hooks. A stack of firewood was neatly piled by the stove. I spent the afternoon going through everything. Found some old hunting magazines, a box of shotgun shells, random tools, nothing valuable. The only thing that struck me as odd was a notebook I found in a drawer, filled with my dad's handwriting. Just dates and short entries. October 12, 1997, heard it again past midnight. Stayed inside. November 3, 1997, found another scratch mark on the back wall. Same pattern. April 18, 1998, saw it at the tree line. Didn't approach the cabin this time. The entries stopped in 1999. No explanation, just stopped. I told myself it was about a bear. My dad had been worried about a bear coming around. That made sense. I decided to stay the night. I brought a sleeping bag and some food. I figured I could close the place up properly in the morning and drive back. No point making the trip twice. I got the wood stove going as the sun went down. It put out good heat, but it made the cabin feel smaller, darker. The windows were just black squares reflecting the lamplight back at me. I ate a sandwich and tried to read one of the magazines, but I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about my dad's notebook entries. Saw it at the tree line. Around 9 o'clock, I heard something. A scratching sound, slow and deliberate, coming from the back wall of the cabin, the wall that faced the forest. I stood up and walked into the back room. The sound stopped. I waited, listening. After about 30 seconds, it started again, a long, dragging scratch, like something with claws was pulling down the outside wall. I grabbed one of the lanterns and went outside. The night was cold and moonless. I walked around to the back of the cabin, holding the lantern high. There were scratch marks on the wall, 4 parallel lines, deep gouges in the wood, running from about 7 feet high down to about 3 feet, fresh. The wood was lighter where it had been scraped, but there was nothing there. No animal, no person, just the black wall of forest 15 feet away. I went back inside and locked the door, pushed the small table against it for good measure. The scratching didn't happen again that night, but I didn't sleep. I sat on the cot with the lantern on, listening to every sound the forest made outside. When dawn finally came, I packed up fast. I wanted to leave, get back to my car, get back to pavement and cell service and other people. I was loading my sleeping bag into my trunk when I noticed something. My car was covered in handprints, not like someone had touched it. Like someone had pressed their entire hand against every window, the hood, the roof. Dozens of prints, maybe more, and they were wrong, the fingers too long, the palm too narrow. I tried to wipe one off the driver's side window and the print was on the inside too, inside the car. I got in and started the engine with shaking hands. The steering wheel had prints on it, the dashboard, the gear shift. I tried not to think about it, just drove. The dirt road seemed longer than I remembered, the trees pressing in closer. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I reached pavement. When I finally did, I saw something pale standing in the middle of the dirt road behind me, watching the car disappear. I listed the property with a realtor the next week, priced it low. It sold in 3 days to a developer from Virginia. I should have felt guilty, but I didn't. I did feel guilty when I got a call 2 months later. The buyer wanted to know if I had any documentation about the property history, any previous owners. The construction crew he'd hired wouldn't go back to the site. They'd found something in the woods behind the cabin, he said. Some kind of animal den, but wrong. Bones arranged in circles, and marks on the trees, claw marks that spiraled up the trunks too high for any animal to reach. I told him I didn't know anything about it. That was a lie. I still have my dad's notebook. I read it sometimes, especially the last entry. June 2, 1999, it knows I'm alone now. I won't come back. He never explained what it was, and I never asked when he was alive. I wish I had. Story 5. In March of last year, my girlfriend Amanda and I decided to do a backpacking trip through Daniel Boone National Forest. We'd been dating about 8 months, and she was really into hiking, had all the gear, knew all the trails. I was less experienced but willing to try. She planned a 3-day route that would take us through some of the more remote sections near the Cumberland Ranger District. We started at the trailhead on a Thursday morning. The weather was perfect, mid-60s, clear sky, that early spring smell of everything starting to grow. Amanda was in a good mood, singing while we hiked, pointing out birds. I was already struggling with my pack weight and we were only an hour in, but I didn't want to complain. The trail followed a ridgeline for the first few miles, then dropped down into a valley. We were supposed to camp near a creek Amanda knew about from a previous trip. She said it was a beautiful spot, totally secluded. We reached it around 4 in the afternoon. She was right, it was beautiful. The creek ran clear over smooth stones, and there was a flat area under some hemlocks perfect for a tent. We set up camp and filtered water for dinner. Amanda made ramen on a camp stove while I gathered wood for a fire. That's when I found the boot. It was just sitting on a rock near the creek, about 50 yards from our camp. A hiking boot, right foot, good condition. The laces were still tied. "Hey, someone left their boot," I called to Amanda. She came over to look. "That's weird. Should we take it, in case someone comes back looking?" She picked it up, examined it. "It's not wet, hasn't been here long." We looked around for the other boot, or a pack, or any sign of another person. Nothing, just the one boot, laces tied, sitting on a rock. "Maybe someone was testing the waterproof rating," Amanda joked. "Failed experiment." We took it back to camp. I don't know why. It felt wrong to leave it there. We ate dinner as the sun went down. The forest got dark fast. Those hemlocks blocked most of the remaining light. Amanda wanted to skip the fire, said we should practice low-impact camping, but I insisted. I liked having the light. Around 8 o'clock we heard someone whistle. It was close, maybe 30 yards away uphill from our camp. A short, sharp whistle like someone calling a dog. "Hello?" Amanda called out. No response. We waited. After a minute the whistle came again, same direction, same short pattern. "That's weird," Amanda said. She sounded uneasy. "Maybe it's a bird." Birds don't whistle at night. We sat there listening. The whistle came a third time and then a fourth. Always from the same spot, always the same pattern. Then it stopped. We went to bed around 10. Our tent was a 2-person backpacking tent, tight quarters, but I was glad to have the walls around us even if they were just nylon. I could hear Amanda shifting in her sleeping bag next to me, not quite asleep. "You awake?" she whispered. "Yeah. I think someone's messing with us. The boot, the whistling, maybe it's some asshole trying to scare hikers. Maybe. I'm going to yell at them if they do it again." But there was no more whistling. I fell asleep listening to the creek. I woke up because Amanda was shaking me. The tent was pitch black. "Someone's walking around outside," she whispered. I listened. Heard footsteps, slow and uneven, circling the tent, leaves crunching, twigs breaking. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and useless. The footsteps stopped. We waited in the silence. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure Amanda could hear it. Then the footsteps started again. Closer, right next to the tent wall. I could see the fabric moving slightly as something brushed against it. Amanda grabbed her flashlight and unzipped the tent fly. The sound was loud in the quiet. She shined the light outside. Nothing. The footsteps had stopped. The forest was empty and still. "What the fuck?" Amanda breathed. We sat there with the light on for maybe 20 minutes listening. Finally, Amanda zipped the tent back up. "We're leaving in the morning," she said. "First light, I don't care if we cut the trip short." I agreed immediately. We didn't sleep after that, just lay there waiting for dawn. Around 4 in the morning, when the sky was just starting to lighten, Amanda sat up suddenly. "Where's the boot?" We'd left it outside near the fire ring. I unzipped the tent and looked. The boot was gone. In its place, sitting on the same rock we'd found it on, was the left boot. Same brand, same size, laces tied. We packed up without breakfast. I've never broken camp so fast in my life. We were on the trail by 5:30, hiking back the way we'd come, barely talking. About a mile from our campsite, Amanda stopped. "Look." She was pointing at the trail ahead of us. In the dirt, clear as anything, was a boot print, right foot. Then 10 feet ahead, a left footprint. Then right again. Someone or something had walked this trail recently, heading in the direction we were going, away from our camp. But the prints were wrong. The stride was too long, at least 5 feet between prints, and they were deep, pressed into the dirt, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. We followed the prints for another quarter mile. They stopped at a tree, just stopped, right at the base of a massive oak. No prints leading away, nothing. Amanda looked up into the branches. I did too. The tree was huge, branches spreading out 30 feet above us. "We should keep moving," I said. We didn't talk for the rest of the hike, made it back to the trailhead by noon and drove straight home. Amanda didn't even want to stop for lunch. 2 days later she called me. Said she'd been going through the photos from the trip on her phone. Most of them were from the first day, scenic shots of the ridgeline and the valley. But there was one she didn't remember taking. She sent it to me. It was a photo of our tent from the outside, taken at night. You could see the glow of our flashlight through the fabric, 2 shapes inside the tent, us sleeping. The metadata said it was taken at 2:47 a.m., right around when we'd heard the footsteps. Amanda's phone had been in the tent with us in her pack. She swears she didn't take the photo, but someone did. We broke up a month later. Nothing to do with the trip, we told people, just wasn't working out, but I think we both knew. We didn't want to talk about what happened, and not talking about it meant not being around each other. I haven't been camping since. Amanda moved to Colorado. I hope she's hiking again. I hope she feels safe in the woods. I don't. Story 6. I inherited money when my grandmother passed. Not a lot, but enough that I could take some time off work and do something I'd been putting off. I wanted to hike the Shelby Trace, this 300-mile trail that runs through Kentucky from the north end of Daniel Boone National Forest down to Tennessee. I'd been planning it for years, but never had the time or money. I started in late April, figuring I could do the whole thing in about 3 weeks. The trail is marked with white turtles painted on trees, and the first few days were exactly what I'd hoped for. Long stretches of quiet forest, occasional creek crossings, small towns where I could resupply. I saw maybe a dozen other hikers total. It was peaceful. On the 8th day, I reached a section near the middle fork of the Red River. The trail went through a gorge area, lots of rock formations and overhangs. Beautiful country, but remote. I hadn't seen another person in 2 days. Around mid-afternoon, I came across something strange. A cairn, but not the usual kind hikers make. This was elaborate stone stacked in a spiral pattern about 4 feet high, and woven into it were small branches and what looked like twine made from plant fiber. It was sitting right in the middle of the trail. I took a photo and walked around it. Seemed like something a local might have made, some kind of art project. I didn't think much about it. An hour later, I found another one. Same spiral pattern, same branch and fiber weaving. This one was off the trail about 10 feet, visible through the trees. By the time I found the 4th one, I was getting uneasy. They were appearing every half mile or so, always the same design, and they seemed to be leading me deeper into the gorge. I checked my map. The trail should have been starting to climb out of the gorge soon, heading up toward a ridge. But the white turtle marks kept leading me forward, following the creek, following the cairns. I started to think I'd missed a turn somewhere. The light was fading and I needed to find a place to camp. I decided to keep going until I reached a flat spot, then reassess in the morning. That's when I found the cave. It wasn't a large cave, just an overhang really, maybe 15 feet deep and 20 feet wide. But someone had been living there, or staying there. There was a fire ring made of stones, some empty food cans, a tarp strung up in the back. And in the dirt floor, scratched out like someone had used a stick, was a message. "Don't follow the cairns, turn back." My stomach dropped. I looked behind me, back the way I'd come. The sun was low, throwing long shadows through the trees. The cairns I'd been following were barely visible now, just dark shapes in the failing light. I should have turned back right then, set up my tent and hiked out in the morning. But I was tired and it was getting dark fast, and the cave had a fire ring. I decided to stay there for the night. I got a fire going and ate a quick dinner, instant rice, some dried fruit. The cave was dry and the fire gave good light. I told myself the message had been left by some paranoid hermit, or maybe it was a joke. Hikers do strange things. Around 9 o'clock, I heard rocks moving outside the cave. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the darkness. The beam didn't reach far. The forest outside was a solid wall of black. "Hello," I called. The rocks moved again. Scraping sound, like stones being dragged across other stones. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked to the mouth of the cave. Shined my light in the direction of the sound. One of the cairns was closer, I'm sure of it. The nearest one had been maybe 50 feet away when I'd arrived, barely visible through the trees. Now it was at the edge of my firelight, no more than 20 feet from the cave. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself I was wrong, that I'd misjudged the distance earlier. But I knew the cairn had moved. I went back to the fire and sat down, didn't take my eyes off the cave mouth. Every few minutes I'd hear the rocks moving again, always closer, and I'd shine my light out and see nothing. Just darkness and trees and the vague shapes of cairns that seemed to be creeping forward. Around midnight I saw it. A figure, crouched on top of one of the cairns, silhouetted against the slightly lighter sky. It was human-shaped but wrong, too long in the limbs, too angular. It was perfectly still, facing the cave, and even though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was looking at me. I threw more wood on the fire. The flames jumped higher and the figure didn't move. It just sat there watching, and I could hear a sound now, a soft clicking like stones tapping together coming from where it crouched. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me in the cave, it on the cairn, the fire between us. Hours, maybe. Time felt wrong, too slow. When dawn finally came, the figure was gone. So were the cairns. I packed up and left as soon as there was enough light to see the trail. I didn't follow the white turtles anymore. I used my map and compass and took the most direct route I could find toward the nearest road, even if it meant bushwhacking through rough terrain. I made it to a highway by mid-afternoon and hitchhiked into a small town. Ended my hike there. 300 miles cut short at day 8. I still have the photo of the first cairn on my phone. I looked at it a few weeks ago and noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the background behind the cairn, there's a figure standing in the trees. Just a blur, but it's there, watching the trail. I never posted the photo online. Never told anyone what happened except my brother, and he thinks I had some kind of breakdown from hiking alone too long. Maybe he's right. Maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion or dehydration, but I still have the scratches on my tent, 3 long tears in the fabric that weren't there before that night. They're on the outside of the tent, at exactly the height where something crouching on a cairn might have reached down to touch it. I haven't been able to bring myself to throw the tent away, but I haven't used it again either. Story 7. My brother Tobias and I grew up on the eastern edge of Cumberland County, and every summer when we were teenagers we'd camp at this spot he'd found near Little Laurel Creek. It was maybe 3 miles off any real trail, deep enough in the forest that you felt properly isolated, but close enough to the creek that we always had water. We'd go up there for a weekend, build a fire, tell stupid stories, pretend we were survivalists. This was back in 2009, I think. Or maybe 2010. Tobias was 17 and I was 15, and we'd convinced our mom that we were responsible enough to go without adult supervision. We hiked in on a Friday afternoon in July. The forest was thick with summer growth, humid and buggy, but we knew the way by heart. When we reached our usual camping spot, a flat area under some big poplars, we dropped our packs and got to work setting up. Tobias noticed it first. Someone's been here. He was standing at the edge of camp, looking at a tree. I walked over. There were marks carved into the bark, not words, just lines and shapes. They ran in a vertical column about 6 feet high. Probably hunters, I said, in July. Point. We looked at other trees nearby. More marks, different patterns, all carved at roughly the same height. They formed a rough circle around our camping area. Maybe we should find a different spot, Tobias said. But we'd already set up the tent and it was getting late. I convinced him it was fine, just some weird art project or Native American symbols or something. Tobias wasn't happy about it, but he agreed to stay. We made dinner, hot dogs and beans, cooked over a fire. The sun went down, and the forest got that particular kind of dark you only get miles from any light source. Deep, complete darkness beyond the fire's glow. Around 10 o'clock we heard singing. It was coming from somewhere in the forest, distant but clear. A man's voice, low and steady, singing something with no melody I recognized. Not English. I don't think it was any language, actually. Just sounds, rising and falling in a pattern that set my teeth on edge. What the hell is that? I whispered. Tobias was staring into the darkness. I don't know. The singing continued for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped abruptly. We sat there listening to the silence, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. Should we check it out? I asked. No. Tobias's voice had an edge I didn't like. He was scared, and Tobias never got scared. We stayed by the fire. Neither of us wanted to go to the tent, which was outside the firelight in the darker area under the trees. Around midnight, Tobias threw more wood on the fire and said we should take turns keeping watch. Watch for what? I don't know, just watch. I took the first shift. Tobias crawled into the tent while I sat by the fire, feeding it periodically, trying not to look too hard into the surrounding darkness. My eyes kept playing tricks on me. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every tree looked like a person standing just beyond the light. Around 1 in the morning I heard footsteps. Someone was walking through the forest toward our camp. Slow, heavy steps, breaking branches, making no effort to be quiet. Tobias, I hissed. He was out of the tent in seconds, standing next to me, both of us staring in the direction of the footsteps. They got closer and closer, and then stopped right at the edge of the firelight. I couldn't see anyone, just darkness and trees and the firelight reflecting off bark. Who's there? Tobias called out. No answer, but I could hear breathing. Heavy, rasping breathing like someone who'd been running hard. Then the singing started again. Same voice, same wordless melody. But now it was close. So close it sounded like the person was standing right at the edge of the light, just beyond where we could see. Tobias grabbed a burning branch from the fire and held it up like a torch. Show yourself. The singing stopped, and and then something moved in the darkness. Something tall, taller than a person should be, shifting position, and I saw for just a second the outline of a head tilted at an impossible angle, neck bent too far, and long arms hanging down past where knees should be. Tobias threw the burning branch. It arced through the air and landed in the leaves about 10 feet from camp, illuminating a small circle of forest floor. Nothing was there, but we could still hear the breathing. All around us now, like whatever it was had moved, was circling the camp. "We are leaving," Tobias said. "It's the middle of the night." "I don't care." We packed in maybe 3 minutes, just grabbed our gear and shoved it into our bags, left the tent standing, left the fire burning. We turned on our flashlights and started hiking back toward the trailhead, moving fast, not running but close to it. The breathing followed us. We couldn't see anything when we shined our lights behind us, but we could hear it, heavy, rasping breaths keeping pace with us through the forest, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always there. We made it to the trailhead around 3 in the morning and ran to Tobias's truck. He fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, finally got the door unlocked. We threw our gear in the bed and climbed in. As Tobias started the engine, I looked back toward the forest. There was someone standing at the trailhead, tall and thin and motionless, outlined against the trees by our headlights. Its arms hung down almost to the ground. "Drive," I said. Tobias drove. We didn't talk about it for a long time. Years, actually. It wasn't until our mom died in 2019, and we were cleaning out her house, that Tobias brought it up. "You remember that camping trip, when we left in the middle of the night?" "Yeah. I went back there last year. I wanted to see if I could figure out what it was. And the marks on the trees are still there, but there are more of them now. They circle a bigger area, and I found something in the center." He showed me a photo on his phone. It was a structure made of branches and bones, woven together in a dome shape. Inside the dome, sitting on the ground, was a pile of personal items: watches, a boot, a hunting knife, a camera, pieces of clothing. "These are from people who went missing," Tobias said quietly. I recognized the boot. It was on a flyer at the ranger station, a hiker who disappeared in 2011, and the camera has a name engraved on it. I looked him up. He went missing in 2007. I looked at the photo. There were at least a dozen items in the pile. "You need to tell the police," I said. "And say what?" "That I found a collection of missing persons, belongings in an illegal structure in the national forest, because I went back to a place that scared me 10 years ago." He had a point. "Did you see it?" I asked. "When you went back?" "No, but I heard singing, and I left before it got dark." We never went back. Tobias sent an anonymous tip to the Park Service about the structure's location, but I don't know if they ever investigated. I don't know if they found anything. I still think about those marks on the trees, the way they circled our camp, like a boundary or a trap. Story 8. I was 23 and working for a power company out of Corbin, doing line maintenance and inspection. It was mostly boring work, driving around to transmission towers in remote areas, checking for damage or corrosion, filing reports. The job paid well enough, and I got to work alone, which I liked. In November, I got assigned to inspect a series of towers along the Cumberland Plateau. There were 12 towers total, running through pretty rough terrain, national forest mostly, with access roads that were barely maintained. The whole route would take me 3 days if I pushed it, 5 if I was thorough. I started on a Monday. The first 6 towers were routine, minor rust on some of the bolts, a few branches that needed clearing, nothing major. I camped in my truck that night at a pull-off near Gatliff Bridge, ate cold dinner from a cooler, slept in the back seat. Tuesday morning I drove to Tower 7. The access road was worse than the previous ones, more of an overgrown trail than a road. My truck barely made it, scraping bottom on rocks, branches scratching the sides. The tower was about half a mile in from the main forest road. When I reached it, I immediately saw something was wrong. There was a tent pitched under the tower. A backpacking tent, small and green, with the fly properly staked down. Next to it was a camping chair and the remains of a fire ring. But no one was around. I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" No answer. The forest was quiet, too quiet actually. I realized I hadn't heard any birds since I'd left the main road. I walked over to the tent and unzipped the fly. Empty. Sleeping bag laid out neatly, a backpack in the corner, some food in a stuffed sack, a book, one of those thick fantasy novels, sitting on the sleeping bag with a bookmark about halfway through. It looked like someone had just stepped away for a minute. But the tent was covered in dew, undisturbed, like nobody had entered or exited since last night. I checked the fire ring. Cold ashes, at least a day old. I should have radioed it in. The power company had given me a satellite radio for emergencies, but I told myself maybe the camper had gone for a hike, or maybe they'd gotten a ride out and planned to come back for their gear. People do strange things. I inspected the tower. It took me about an hour. Everything was fine except for some bird nests in the upper framework that I'd need to report. While I was working, I kept glancing at the tent, expecting to see someone return. Nobody did. I finished my inspection and hiked back to my truck. As I was pulling away, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw someone standing near the tent. A woman, I thought, wearing dark clothes, facing away from me toward the tower. I stopped the truck and looked again. Nobody there. I drove to Tower 8. The access road was even worse, and I had to park and hike the last quarter mile. The tower was in a small clearing surrounded by thick pines. There was another tent, same green color, same style, different camping chair, different fire ring. And again, nobody around. This time I radioed it in, told the dispatcher I'd found 2 abandoned campsites near Towers 7 and 8. She said she'd alert the Forest Service and asked if I wanted to stop the inspection. I said no, I had a job to do. Tower 9 had a tent too, so did 10, 4 tents, 4 towers, all empty. All looked like someone had just stepped away. Books left open, food unsecured, camp chairs positioned facing the towers. I was getting seriously freaked out. The forest felt wrong now, too silent, too empty. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone watching me, but I was always alone. I reached Tower 11 around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was getting low, throwing long shadows through the trees. The access road ended about half a mile from the tower, blocked by a fallen tree I couldn't move. I grabbed my inspection kit and hiked in. The tent was there, but this time there was someone in the camping chair. A man, sitting with his back to the trail facing the tower. He was completely still. "Hey," I called out, "everything okay?" He didn't move, didn't turn around. Just sat there. I walked closer, feeling my skin prickle. "Sir, I'm with the power company. I need to inspect the tower." Still nothing. I circled around to get a view of his face. The chair was empty. I stood there staring at it, my heart hammering. I had seen someone, I was certain. Someone had been sitting in that chair. I turned slowly, looking at the forest around me. Nothing, no movement, no sound, and then I heard it. A voice, distant, calling my name. "Trevor." It was my supervisor's voice. "Carl." He was back at the office, 2 hours away. He couldn't be here. "Trevor, come look at this." The voice was coming from up in the tower. I looked up, following the steel framework with my eyes to the top, about 80 feet above me. There was someone standing on the highest platform, a silhouette against the darkening sky, too far away to make out features. "Carl," I called up. The figure raised one arm and beckoned. A slow, deliberate wave. I ran. Didn't inspect the tower, didn't look back, just grabbed my kit and ran for my truck. The forest was getting dark fast and I tripped twice on the trail, scraping my hands, but I didn't stop. When I reached my truck, I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, found them again, got the door open and threw myself inside. I locked the doors and started the engine. As I was reversing away from the fallen tree, my headlights swept across the forest. All 4 figures were standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. 4 people, evenly spaced, perfectly still. I couldn't see their faces in the glare of the headlights, but I could see their arms, too long, hanging down past their knees. I drove back to the main road, doing probably 40 miles an hour on a trail that wasn't meant for more than 10. Bottomed out the truck twice, didn't care, didn't stop until I reached pavement. I called Carl from a gas station in Corbin. Told him I'd gotten sick, had to cut the inspection short. He was pissed but said I could finish the route next week. I quit the next day, turned in my equipment, my truck keys, my radio, told them it wasn't a good fit. Carl called me a few months later, said they'd sent a different tech to finish the inspection. The guy had found the tents, but they were empty. No gear, no sleeping bags, nothing, just empty tents with the flies open, like they'd been stripped clean. And Tower 11 had been damaged. Something had torn off panels from the upper framework, bent support beams. Carl said it looked like someone had attacked it with heavy machinery, but there were no roads big enough to get machinery to that tower. They ended up taking Tower 11 offline completely, too remote and too damaged to be worth repairing. I asked Carl if the tech had seen anyone out there. He said no, but the guy had refused to go back to that sector ever again, so maybe he had. I still have the inspection checklist in my truck. Towers 7 through 11, all marked incomplete. Sometimes I think about those tents, who they belonged to, whether those people walked into the forest or whether something walked out wearing their faces. I try not to think about it too much. Story 9. I never believed in ghosts or curses or anything like that until I spent a night in the old Minton house. This was 3 years ago, summer of 2022, and I was working as a freelance photographer doing real estate listings. The job was mostly boring, empty houses, good lighting, quick turnaround, but it paid the bills while I tried to build my portfolio. A realtor I'd worked with before, Claire Brennan, called me about a property near Jellicoe. She said it was a historical home, been in the same family for generations, just came on the market. Owner had passed and the estate wanted to sell it furnished, so she needed photos that showed the character of the place, not just empty rooms. The pay was good, double my usual rate, and she said I could stay overnight if I wanted since it was a 2-hour drive from where I lived in Knoxville. Yet the golden hour shots at sunset and sunrise really make the listing pop. I drove up on a Thursday. The house was at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by forest, backing up against Cumberland Mountain. It was a 2-story brick farmhouse, probably built in the 1920s, with a wide porch and narrow windows. The paint was peeling and some of the shutters hung crooked, but it had good bones. Exactly the kind of place people looking for a fix-upper with character would love. Claire met me there with the keys. She gave me a quick tour, 4 bedrooms upstairs, living room, dining room, kitchen, and a pantry downstairs. The furniture was old and mismatched, and every room had this smell of dust and time. Owner was a woman named Margaret Minton, Claire said while we walked through. She was 91 when she died, lived here alone for the last 40 years. Any family? A nephew in Florida. He hired me to handle the sale, said he'd never been here, didn't want to visit. That struck me as odd, but I didn't push it. Claire left around 6, said she'd check in tomorrow. I spent the next few hours shooting interiors. The late afternoon light coming through those narrow windows was perfect. Rich and golden and slightly melancholy, exactly the kind of atmosphere buyers love. Around 8, I took some exterior shots. The property had about 5 acres, mostly overgrown fields transitioning back to forest. There was an old barn in the back, half collapsed. I got some nice silhouette shots as the sun went down. I made dinner on a camp stove I'd brought, just pasta and sauce, and ate in the kitchen. The house was quiet, the kind of deep, settling quiet you get in old buildings, creaks and taps and the sound of wood adjusting to temperature changes. I'd brought my sleeping bag and planned to crash on the living room couch. There were beds upstairs, but sleeping in a dead stranger's bed felt wrong. Around 10, I was reviewing photos on my laptop when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, shuffling footsteps moving across one of the bedrooms, then stopping, then starting again. I froze. Listen. The footsteps continued, walking from one side of the room to the other, back and forth, like someone pacing. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the stairs. Hello, anyone there? The footsteps stopped. I waited, shining my light up into the dark hallway. Nothing. I'm a photographer working for the realtor, I called. If someone's here, you need to leave. This is private property. Silence. I climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other ready to call 911. The hallway ran the length of the house, doors on both sides. All of them were closed except one at the far end, the master bedroom I remembered from the tour. The door was standing open. I'd closed it earlier, I was certain. I walked down the hallway and pushed the door wider. The room was empty. A 4-poster bed with a faded quilt, a dresser, a rocking chair by the window. Normal, lifeless, but the rocking chair was moving, just slightly, like someone had just stood up from it. I backed out of the room and pulled the door shut. Heard the latch click, walked back downstairs trying to control my breathing. Old houses settle, drafts move things. The chair could have been rocking from air current, all reasonable explanations. I tried to go back to editing photos, but I couldn't focus. Every small sound made me jump. Around 11, I heard the footsteps again. Same pattern, slow, shuffling, back and forth across the upstairs room. I turned on all the lights downstairs. Didn't care about wasting electricity. just needed the house to feel less empty. Around midnight, I heard something new, a sound like furniture being dragged across the floor upstairs. Heavy, sustained scraping from one end of the hall to the other. That was enough. I grabbed my keys and went for the door. It was locked, not just locked. The deadbolt was engaged and the key I'd been given didn't work. I tried it 3 times, jiggling and turning, but the bolt wouldn't move. "Come on," I whispered, hands shaking. Behind me, the dragging sound stopped. The house went silent, and then I heard a voice, thin and old and so close it could have been right behind me. "Are you Margaret's boy?" I spun around. The living room was empty. All the lights were still on. Nothing had changed, but the voice had been clear, right in my ear. "I'm not," I said to the empty room, voice cracking. "I'm just here to take pictures." Silence, then from upstairs, "You're not her boy. Her boy doesn't visit." I tried the door again. The key turned this time smooth and easy like it had never been stuck. I pulled the door open and ran for my car. I was halfway down the driveway when I remembered my camera equipment, a $3,000 kit sitting in the living room. I stopped the car and looked back at the house. Every window was lit. Every single window, upstairs and down, glowing warm and yellow like the house was full of people. I'd only turned on the downstairs lights. I drove to a motel in Jellicoe and called Claire at midnight. Told her I'd had a family emergency and had to leave. She was annoyed, but said she'd pick up my equipment in the morning. She called me the next day, said she'd found my gear, but also wanted to know why I'd rearranged all the furniture upstairs. The beds had been moved to the centers of the rooms, the dressers pushed against the doors, the rocking chair from the master bedroom sitting at the top of the stairs facing down. I told her I hadn't touched anything. There was a long pause. Then she said, "The nephew told me Margaret died in that rocking chair. Sat there for days, apparently, before anyone found her." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm pulling the listing. I can't sell this house." "Why not?" "Because when I walked upstairs this morning, the rocking chair was still warm." The house never sold. Claire dropped it from her listings, and the nephew eventually stopped paying property taxes. I looked it up last month. It's in foreclosure now, abandoned, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. I got one good photo from that night. I didn't realize it until a week later, going through all the files. It's a shot I took of the upstairs hallway late afternoon when the light was still good. In the master bedroom, visible through the open door, someone is sitting in the rocking chair. An old woman, thin and gray, facing the window. She's clear in the photo, not a blur or a shadow, just sitting there. I never showed that photo to Claire, never showed anyone. I printed it once though, thought maybe seeing it in physical form would make it less real somehow. It didn't. I burned the print that same night, but I still have the digital file. I can't bring myself to delete it. Sometimes I open it late at night and zoom in on the figure in the chair, trying to see her face. But it's always turned away, looking out the window, waiting, I think, for her boy to visit. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more true horror from the backroads and forgotten places. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there, and maybe think twice before taking that shortcut through the mountains.